Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine just about a month ago, the threat of a cyber attack has been looming both here in the US and abroad. I'm here with CSO Online senior writer Lucian Constantine to discuss the current threat landscape. Stick around. Hey everyone, welcome back to Today in Tech. I'm Julia Beauchamp, and as I said, I am here with CSO Online senior writer Lucian Constantine. Lucian, thank you so much for calling in and chatting with me today. Definitely a super important topic.
Hi Julia, thanks for having me.
So, my first question for you is just what does the threat landscape currently look like when it comes to cyber attacks on, let's say critical infrastructure, things like, telecom, banking, pipelines, and how has that changed within the last month or so, if at all?
Right. I wouldn't say necessarily that in terms of techniques, it has changed, like the types of attacks, but the risk is obviously higher. The likelihood of these attacks happening is higher. And that is because that is driven by obviously the economic sanctions against Russia, the whole geopolitical and diplomatic tensions. There might be retaliations for the economic sanctions and so on. I think people have been surprised that they haven't seen the levels of cyber war that they were expecting, where the Russian state government agencies take responsibility directly for some attacks, but I think some actions have already happened. Some of these attacks have already happened. They are done much more stealthily and with without attribution to complicate attribution. But we know, at least in Ukraine itself, when the war started, we had a sudden attack against Viasat satellite network in Europe, which took out satellite communications in Ukraine, but also in Poland and Germany, so kind of collateral damage, which, while it hasn't yet been directly attributed to Russia, that is the suspicion, because the timing and the value on the field of disrupted communications is obviously valuable in war. And just today, we had an attack against a major Ukrainian internet service provider that also took out their communications, and they were serving governments as well as the population and institutions. So there were some attacks against Ukrainian banks and against other organizations like data wipers. These are destructive malware threats that, unlike ransomware, which encrypt your files and ask for a ransom to decrypt them, these threats kind of delete files, and including the operating system and the boot sector and all that, with the purpose of creating downtimes and crippling infrastructure that's supposed to serve various services, right?
Yeah, and I think you make an interesting point. While obviously, the war has been very much like boots on the ground, there hasn't been this catastrophic necessarily cyber incident that perhaps people were expecting. And I think how do sort of these hacktivist type groups play into this landscape if some of these attacks are not being directly attributed to governments?
I think the attacks by these groups, they can offer, the threat here is they can offer some plausible deniability, because these groups are very loosely coordinated. They don't have a hierarchy of structure. Like in Anonymous, there are various individual teams that do various operations. Everyone is kind of trying to contribute their skills, because they have the motivation, they want to stand with Ukraine and all that, right? So this could offer an opportunity for government agents to kind of infiltrate and launch more sophisticated attacks. I'm not saying this happened, but this can be the case, or with the Ukrainian IT army, which is a bit different, because it is coordinated by the Ukrainian government, by their Ministry of Digital Communications or something like that. So it has some direct ties to the Ukrainian government. and again, it's volunteers. It's very much like the volunteers that joined the Ukrainian Foreign Legion, right? That was set up and took up arms and went to Ukraine to fight for Ukraine, even though they're not Ukrainian citizens, right? So it's kind of like the same thing. And Russia, as they can claim for the boots on the ground for these volunteers that there might be serving as cover for the West to send special units and special forces disguised as volunteers, they can claim the same thing about these groups, right? Like Anonymous or the Ukrainian IT army, that they're not really volunteers. They are the Western
Sure.
agents launching attacks, right? So then they can claim we can strike back if they want to go that route. But I think for the most part, it's staying more in the realm of plausible deniability, kind of using these groups. And Russia has a history of using cyber criminal groups to do their operations or their bidding. And we've seen this in indictments of official U.S. Department of Justice indictments for hacks in the past that were done by cyber criminal groups, but directed by FSB officers or even FSB officers charged in connections with those attacks, right?
Right. So what you're saying is that because of the nature of these types of groups, that they offer, relative or almost not even relative, complete anonymity when it comes to who like the individual is who has carried out this attack. It's easy for perhaps a government group or individual to sort of jump in and say, "Oh, that wasn't the government. That was this goodwill group." Is that what you're getting at?
Yes. I mean, the problem with taking responsibility for cyber attacks are the policies of the other party. Like the US, I know at least they said if we are attacked, if our infrastructure is attacked as part of a on the side of an armed conflict, we can retaliate both in the cyberspace, but might also retaliate in the physical space.
I
right?
understand.
So no one wants that sort of escalation, I
Yeah,
think.
of course.
Because Russia can always claim that the U.S. intelligence is bad, or the Department of Justice's claims or indictments of FSB officers is bogus, and they didn't really collaborate. Clearly, the U.S., the FBI, they have their own intelligence. Otherwise, we wouldn't see these names in these indictments. So they have some visibility into this collaboration, but Russia will probably never say yes.
Yeah,
we did it, right? So it's.
So I would think that, the threat of a cyber incident, especially for, critical infrastructure, the financial services industry, those types of things, food supply chains, those types of things are, I would think, sort of like ever-present cyber threats. So is it hard right now to delineate between what is and is not in retaliation for sanctions?
I think it's hard, but I think it is to be expected. So the White House and CISA in the US are warning about increased risks against the US critical infrastructure operators or the financial sector or other types of organizations and government organizations, and for a very good reason, right? Russia is pressured right now because of the economic sanctions, which they hold the West responsible for, right? So whether it's cyber criminal groups hitting Western organizations out of a sense of nationalistic pride or things like that, whether they're directed by Russian state agencies to launch attacks, whether the Russian agencies launch attacks themselves by infiltrating other groups, it doesn't really matter. The idea is there is a higher risk of such attacks occurring right now because of the situation that's going on and because of the sanctions. And I would give here, because first of all, the cyber criminal groups feel the economic sanctions as well, right? So they will need more money. They need money to operate, and they need money for themselves, right? So that kind of encourages them to launch even more attacks on top of this sense of revenge for what their country is being put through, right? Rightfully from the Western perspective, obviously. But there's also the government might try to skirt some of these economic sanctions through the means of cyber attacks and moving money around with Bitcoin and stuff like that, which we've seen in the past with North Korea, for example, which has its own cyber threat group called Lazarus, which is attributed to North Korea's government. But we've seen Lazarus engaging in very attacks that seem very cybercrime-like, very financially motivated, as opposed to just espionage like state agencies usually do, or sabotage in some cases against South Korea, because it's there's the situation there between North Korea and South Korea. But the reason we're seeing those type of financially motivated attacks is because North Korea is under sanctions, has been under sanctions for a very long time. It's cut off from international trade, and it needs money, which is happening now with Russia, not yet to the same extent. But in the future, we might see attempts to try to kind of get around some of those sections.
Sure. So what sort of resources are available for an organization that is perhaps, a part of critical infrastructure or a government contract or something like that? And I mean, I'm sure in some cases they probably have plenty of staff on hand, but what sort of directives have there been for these types of organizations that are, especially looking to beef up their security protocols? I would imagine that because the number of targets is so high in number, I would imagine that it'd be very difficult to defend everything.
Yes. I mean, there is the U.S. government, or CISA, has the Shields Up effort, through which they offer various resources in terms of information exchange, but also defensive measures that organizations should take, a list of tools, free tools and open source and free commercial tools that can be used. And then there's more specific type of mitigation advice or recommendations for the industrial sector or critical infrastructure operators. Last week, we've seen the DOJ announced indictments were unsealed against in relation to two attacks. One was the Triton malware, which is one of the more sophisticated malware threats, specifically designed to infect industrial controllers. In this case, safety instrumented systems, which are the last line of defense in an industrial installation. When a process goes out of parameters, these devices are supposed to do a clean shutdown, a safety shutdown, right? So if you control these devices and you tell the operator that everything is going on normally, when it isn't, you can have risks of explosions, things like that, right? Very serious damage to human life and to obviously assets. So we know these attacks we know this was attributed to one of the research centers affiliated with the Russian Ministry of Defense. A programmer from there is actually named in the indictments. So we know that Russia has these capabilities. The other indictment regards a group known as Dragonfly, and 3 FSB officers are named for that. This is a malware that scans networks for SCADA, supervisory control and data acquisition. These are special applications that monitor industrial control systems, PLCs, and other industrial controllers, right? So again, we know this capability. They have these capabilities, right? So there are specific mitigation steps that these organizations need to take to separate their IT networks from their OT network, operational technology networks. And these are in separate advisories that was released last week by CISA and the Department of Energy and the FBI alongside these indictments. There are resources out there that the U.S. government is making these resources available.
Great. Thank you so much. I think there's a lot of interesting information here about, sort of just like this current state of affairs, what types of things organizations, enterprises, IT departments can do if they're concerned about the risk, if they're concerned about the risk of a cyber incident. So thank you so much, Lucian. I really appreciate your insight here.
Thank you.
And thank you all so much for watching this episode of Today in Tech. If you found this helpful or valuable or interesting, please do give it a thumbs up. You can also subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you're notified every single time we post a new video. If you have any questions or comments about this topic, please do let me know in the comments below and I will do my best to get back to you. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.